Welcome back and thanks for staying tuned to ADBN Television. Our main topic and discuss this morning is government and human rights, action, advocacy and accountability. Our guest on the program is the program manager, Amnesty International Nigeria, Barbara Magaji. Good morning to you, Mrs. Barbara Magaji, and welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
Now, it's a time when there's a lot of conversation, particularly in the civic space, about the need for a citizen-led approach in dialoguing with the government, particularly in the need to take decisive actions. There's also the need for accountability and, overarchingly, social justice as it concerns the lives of millions of Nigerians. I'd like to commend Amnesty International Nigeria for the amazing work it's been doing, but as program manager, how much of a Herculean task has this been?
Thank you so much. This has not been easy at all, especially in Nigeria where we are diverse, different backgrounds, cultures, religion, ethnicity, governments come in and go. But it doesn't stop us from doing our work. The role of Amnesty International, our mandate is to promote and protect human rights globally and to try and see how everyone in the world would enjoy human rights to the best of his or her ability or opportunity. Amnesty has been here for a while, and our work has cut across the whole country, looking at different types of human rights issues, from issues of right to life, liberty, issues also of right to dignity of a person as protected in our constitution, but also importantly in international human rights law. So it hasn't been easy. We're encouraged. We see citizens support what we do. We're interested also in the fact that people engage on our work, whether at community level, whether organizing at communities in terms of either our supporters, but also engaging on our reports and seeing that the reports feed into all kinds of accountability mechanisms at all levels. So like you asked, it hasn't been easy, but it's interesting because we like it when, when our work is engaged with and when it is referenced by different stakeholders.
Now, talking about the stakeholders, currently the civic space in Nigeria and the level of public participation, how would you best describe the space? Is it robust? Is it shrinking? Relatively over the years, has there been progress in the amount of engagements, like you've called for more citizens to engage with your reports?
Sometimes you see a bit of engagement and sometimes there's a laid-back attitude, depending on how the society is or depending on how governance is being done. So we've seen at times, so for instance, during the NSAS protests, you could see a lot of engagement by citizens with respect to exercising their rights to protest. Of course, there was clampdown by government also during that time. Again, during the end bad governance protests, you could see
end hunger protests.
Yes, and end hunger. You could still see citizens' participation, but you could still see clampdown. So sometimes, but you could also hear from citizens, this happened, 2020, certain people died because they went to exercise their rights. So there could have been hesitation by people because people don't want to lose their lives. People also don't want to either be detained. There are people that we kept observing their trials who had been affected by the NSAS protests for some years. And good that the courts ended up finding some of them not guilty. People were released and all that. So the apathy depends on how the civic space is, like you said. If people feel that their rights will be protected, they would engage. I know people also were hesitant because parents might say, I don't want to lose my child. Please don't participate in this protest. So it depends on the handwriting on the wall, the demeanor of the government. If the government is It promotes rights, not just by saying it's promoting, or not just by the provisions of the Constitution, international human rights law, but also by seeing that when security agencies participate in those protests, they protect the rights of those protesters as against violating their rights in whatever form, and also protecting the rights of others who are not part of the protests. So it depends on the situation, and it depends on how the government's attitude is at that time.
Now, talking about the government, Nigeria in particular, Nigeria seems to be a boarding ground for a more accountable social justice system. And why I say so is because of late there have been a lot of conferences, dialogues in the Nigerian space. The country supposedly even hosted the 7th regional consultation for human rights commissions in West Africa. We seem to have a bulk of these challenges, and then we're still more or less what many would say the venue for the conversations. Is this a paradox in some sort, or do you see Nigeria actively owning up to its responsibility in addressing these issues?
I think sometimes it's mixed. There's a tendency to see that the saying of Nigeria is the largest, the giant of Africa, I think tends to give us the the encouragement to want to organize events, to be part of the processes that take place with respect to governance. We participate in different international forums with respect to human rights promotion. We can go to Geneva, New York, sign treaties and all that. We can organize conferences, like you said. But whether at the end of the day what is agreed upon we actually implement, it's actually a concern for us as an organization. We have all the relevant treaties. We have signed off to CAT, which is the Convention Against Torture. We've signed off to different treaties, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the one on economic and social cultural rights, and yet our constitution does not even allow us to enjoy economic and social cultural rights issues, because the constitution has made provisions with respect to, for instance, right to housing, right to health, at the beck and call of government. It says government should direct its policy, or it shall. So it's at the discretion of government. If you want to direct your policies to ensure that as I step out of here, if I enter the next government hospital, I should be able to get health services. As against mandating government to do it as a right. And so I can challenge government. People have gone to court to challenge. Yes, the courts have made provisions with pronouncements with respect to our international treaties. But me and you know that rights to housing, right to health, education, these are areas where we're still lacking. Even when there are global sales, or will I say minimum standards that are expected of government with respect to issues like budgetary allocations for education, budgetary allocations for health. So the fact that we host conferences, the cry for citizens is, you can host the conferences, you can go and sign the treaties, but translate it to reality. What does it mean for you to be part of the international system that says I have a right to life, and yet deaths happen every day, unaccounted for? People are enforcedly disappeared, unaccounted for. So it's not about signing treaties. It's not about hosting conferences. You can be the giant in population, but also the giant in implementation. Let us see that people are able to enjoy those rights. What is the likelihood that I will not just come out from here, or me and you will not just come out from here? Something very simple happens, and the police raids and picks everybody. And I can't tell, and you can't tell when you're going to come out of that detention. What is the likelihood that my lawyer will have access to the detention facility to engage with me? What's the likelihood that me and you would even come out from detention? We know those answers.
And this is even for persons like yourself and myself that have a level of education.
It's everybody. You can be on the streets. That's why I use it as easy as not even committing any atrocity. You can just be on the streets.
And there's a raid.
There's a raid. Anybody can be picked if they feel that, oh, they suspect something might have happened here.
Especially in an era where there's a lot of profiling.
Yes.
Young persons are looked at, and you're carrying a kind of hairstyle.
Hairstyle, like what I have, but especially for boys or men who carry dreads that I have. You can be picked up, and then the next thing, we don't know what happens to you. There are people that are facing detention processes, no sense of accountability, And then there are certain provisions of laws or practices that allows prolonged detention, even though the Administration of Criminal Justice Act frowns at it. Detention must be based on timelines, but certain organizations go and seek for extension of timelines in the name of doing investigations. In other parts of the world, you do investigations before you conduct arrests. We arrest and then we investigate. And so therefore, myself and you might be in that detention for a long time until that investigating authority decides
that the investigation
Yes.
has been concluded upon.
Yes.
This brings us to a very important subject which you've raised. This level of impunity by law enforcement and sometimes by even members of the armed forces, the Nigerian military. There's a report credited to the Amnesty International that states that women and girls who escaped from captivity, particularly by Boko Haram, were unlawfully detained and even abused while in detention by the Nigerian army. Would you care to tell us what year this was, and can there be steps taken for some sort of social justice for these women and girls?
The period of time is from the time the girls were either released or they escaped. So from the time after the Chibok girls' abduction, releases kept on taking place for a period of time. Up till today, we still have girls in captivity. Now women, because they are well over 10 years that this has happened. And it's very concerning. A lot of them were, especially if we focus on Chibok, they were in secondary school. So likely between the ages of 16 and 18. They were not yet adults. And then they faced a terrible experience that they had never faced in that community, taken away by terrorists, kept in their conditions, of course, forcefully married off to different people. They've become mothers. And then the society there's a sense of rejection because there are tags, they tag them Boko Haram wives, and then the children who are now innocent have now been tagged Boko Haram children. Now, our concern is their reintegration into the society. And Nigeria even accepting that this thing has happened and then try to see how they can reintegrate them. Because in all honesty, if we were focused on those girls that were picked, they had no idea what it was about. They were not part of the discussion or, the terrorism activities. Some of them we know girls had been involved as suicide bombers, but forced to do that. And if we're saying girls, they are minors, there are issues of consent that we have to even look at. So for us, it's a concern that reintegrating them back into the society is still very slow. Some of them are very worried. Their kids even are of more concern even because there are rights of children. Right to development is a concern. Right to education is also a concern. And then we're trying to stop the victimization and the violations reoccurring. If you do not reintegrate these children, what's the likelihood that they would also join forces and do all kinds of atrocities in the future? Some of them don't know their fathers, especially for the girls who have escaped from those captivities. And then now you're not accepting them into the society. So if we're not careful, we're creating layers and layers of violations into that society. And then for Amnesty is a concern if they are not reintegrated into the society, especially that we see reintegration of people who are suspected to have committed these atrocities.
And are now dubbed repentant.
Yes. So why can't it happen also for people who are falling as victims? In this case, I say victims because some of them were conscripted forcefully and then married off. Forced marriages. So layers of violations, sexual violence happening, and all that.
Now, this concept of restorative justice is one I want us to delve into. You've also harped on the need to protect these persons from further victimization. You referenced the case where there's some sort of repentant Boko Haram members being given a lease to a new life. Whereas these young women and girls who have probably been violated sexually and living with the trauma of their ordeals don't have the luxury of this second chance at life. Now, what are the practicable steps towards restorative justice that the government can employ?
I think it has to be in collaboration with the communities. Some years back, I did some work outside the Amnesty space in the Northeast. And when the discussion around Operation Safe Corridors started, and that's the reintegration of the repentant Boko Haram guys started, The question by the communities were, who said we're ready to reintegrate people that we suspect to have committed these atrocities? Do you understand? Now, we know that people have to be reintegrated, whoever they are, and I'm not talking about whether as perpetrators or even as victims, but it has to be done with community discussion. I don't think the approach of securitization is different. So security addressing its counter-terrorism efforts are totally different. But when you're talking about coming to engage people, so for instance, all the girls, you need to sit down with the community leaders. You need to sit down with youths within the community. You need to sit down with women. The communities have to engage and understand what it is. If not, you might go back to a community and then you'll be ostracized. They would keep you as an island. I tell you, some of these children are referred to as Boko Haram children in those communities. But there needs to be some conversation with some of these communities to say, some of these girls left as girls, some of them were forced into these atrocities. They've given birth to children who are totally innocent. They don't even know what has happened. Can you accept them back into the society? And then if you accept, it's not only the community. Government needs to make a provision of a healing process for them. Psychosocial support, educational support, reintegration, addressing issues of trauma and all that, and then engaging them back, and then bringing their children into the normal space. I know it's a difficult one. It might just sound academic, we talking. But societies that have made attempts, like Rwanda, restorative justice had to be at the end. What brought an end to some of it? Because there are some things that you cannot address head-on security-wise, counter-terrorism-wise. If counter-terrorism efforts finish, where are we going to be? We need to have that discussion. And it has to be collective. It has to focus gender-wise. It has to be youth-based. It is not only male having a discussion. It's not only security. It's not only government. It's persons with disabilities. It's persons who are affected, young people. And then we can then say that it's an inclusive process. Otherwise, it's just going to be one of those processes that excludes a part of a society.
Now, this brings to mind the concept of gender-responsive public services for inclusion. It's one of the things that has, even on the part of the government, somewhat gone under the radar. Now, we have bills, we have budgets that intend for the good of communities. But when you look at them, they're not entirely gender responsive in their planning. For the civic space, a lot of CSOs, much like yourself, make it a priority to remind government of this accountability. But can you say conclusively that there has been some sort of improvement on the part of government in their planning towards identifying the need for gender responsive public services?
I can't say, and why am I saying so? I will use the 5 gender bills that have been pushed over the years. Nigeria signed off to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. But we have a process in Nigeria, that's CEDAW, that says if you sign off onto this international covenants or conventions, you have to domesticate, meaning you have to pass a law at the National Assembly to make it into your own law. That's our process. However, we haven't done that. Currently, we don't have a gender law nationally. What we have, certain states, for instance, Ekiti and Plateau State, have gender laws. And those laws are very broad, they look very nice and lovely to read. And like I said, it's not about creating the laws. Implementation is the next step. But at least that's the first step that some of these states have done. And certain states have policies.
I think Akwa Ibom has one policy like that.
Certain states have policies. Lagos has a policy also. Lagos addresses issues of sexual gender-based violence because they've created certain courts that look specifically at gender-based violence issues. And you see a trend and pattern of the cases being addressed within a short time. And the law says those who are found to have committed this, the convicts, should be exposed so that everybody knows them. You find Lagos doing that. At the national level, we have created the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act.
The VAP law.
The VAP Act. And states have also created, yes.
The VAP law.
Yes. So you will find that that's some semblance of progress. But to what extent are we able to address the different crimes that are included in that act? It's still a call for concern. So, the other bills that are still pending before the National Assembly, I heard recently, I think the one that has to do with women's participation in governance. I think
For
there's
reserved seat.
yes, reserved seat. I think there's some discussion recently. I can't remember the details, but I think I heard that it's coming up again. Possibly something will come out of it. But there's need for urgency in addressing these issues, because if you look at period of time, they say women are 51% to the 49% men in the Nigerian society. And yet you have a part of the society that is not included in almost every process. Is a call for concern. So your question about whether there's inclusion, I think, I don't want to grade it, but I think there is an urgent need to address these issues and try to see how, even if it's CEDAW or the Gender and Equal Opportunities Act should be passed, and then after passing those laws, let us try to implement them, and that's government. Civil society and non-governmental organizations can only do advocacy. The mandate is on government. Even if you are funded to implement an intervention, it's time-bound. Even if it's 10 years, it's still time-bound. Most projects are 3 to 5 years, some 2 years. Once you finish, the donor says hand over, and that's the end of it. So there's need for government to do the needful and try to see that inclusion, and not only gender, also youths, persons with disabilities. We have the Disabilities Act. But to what extent do we implement
it? Now, the overarching challenge now is the different challenges facing different regions, particularly from the angle of insecurity. Also looked at the part of a report that says between January 2021 to June 2023, particularly in the southeast, there have been over 1,000 deaths linked to infightings between state and non-state actors. Now, over time, it's with this large destruction to livelihoods of families, because breadwinners lose their lives. The future in terms of the youth who are supposed to be in school is also being eroded. Is there a hope of finding what I would like to term as a gender-specific solution, or a region-specific solution rather, to these different forms of insecurity affecting the different states? You talked about the Northeast and its peculiarities with Boko Haram. In the Southeast, it's different. How does the government look at these different incidences and prefer solutions that are best suited to those regions?
I'm not sure if we're addressing it regionally. And I know maybe the likelihood is because we don't want to, I think maybe the government doesn't want it to look like we're going back to our regional governments of the past. We want it to look united. We have one Nigerian police force. We have one military. Now, the concern is we have one Nigerian police force. The advocacies for state policing, those are saying no state policing. However, like we have noted, different regions have different forms of conflicts. And it's best to internalize and develop a process that is context specific. So, the situation in the Southeast, for instance, you have the agitation by IPOB, but you have government's way of also saying you can't do this because constitutionally you cannot separate. Then you now have you have also what the Southeast governors have created. Certain states, I think one of the states that has majorly created is Ebonyi State, the Ebubeagu
parliamentary force.
Yes, their own force. What you like, similar to what you have in the Southwest, the Amoteco, what you have in the Southwest, addressing the issues within their context. But the concern is, like our report has noted, it is not just creating another paramilitary or police, state police kind of thing that does not adhere to the rights of the society. It means if you do that, you're compounding the situation. We have already noted some of the violations that occur with the military, with the police, with the different security agencies that exist. Excuse me. Now, if you have another state or regional creation that does similar and also do violations, then you're compounding the situation. And then it affects citizens' rights within those regions. Arrests are carried out. People are enforcedly disappeared. You know, initially the story was unknown gunmen, we don't know who is doing it and all that. But our report has noted the different actors, state and non-state actors, that are violating those rights. Right to life, right to dignity, enforced disappearance, which is quite painful. Families not knowing where their family members have been since either they were arrested or abducted, if we may say, in certain situations. So there is need for a holistic thing, and it goes back to the first question you asked. Implementation is a concern. It's not about saying we are giants or we are this population in this part of the country. It's about, are we ensuring that the rights of people are protected? What is included in those laws? Because, when you look at our laws, there's no law of ours that would knowingly or intentionally violate human rights, because it will not align with the Constitution. Whatever law you're creating, the Constitution aligns, also with international human rights instruments. And so the laws are not the concern, it's the implementation and whether we're ignoring the provisions of the law. So basically, those are the issues, and it has to be addressed context-specific, issue-specific, but must look with the lens of human rights. Human rights is global. There's, apart from, for instance, there's nothing like you have a right to kill anyone, no matter how angry you are at that person. The only time our law, Constitution provides, which Amnesty hesitates on, death penalty. The Nigerian Constitution allows that. But Amnesty always calls for abolition of death penalty, because of the different concerns we have around it, and especially that it doesn't serve, the purpose for which it's intended. And a lot of times in our context, people are kept on death row and not executed. So it's another type of violation again.
Now, this brings my mind to the paramilitary security forces. Are there any, would I call it, any instruments of law, be it treaties, be it community agreements, either at the national or regional levels, that the government can enter with these paramilitary forces to ensure that they do not violate the rights of citizens within their domain?
The Constitution is the bedrock of everything for us as a country. But apart from the constitutions, we have the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. We have the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights. We have the African Charter. Interestingly, for the African Charter, once you're part of the African Union, by force, that charter applies on you. The African Charter has been, hailed or, loved because of the way the charter is. Created by African nations, not someone else that imposed it on us. In the African Charter, there are things around economic and socio-cultural rights that are mandatory. But certain countries like ours have decided to not make those economic and socio-cultural rights issues mandatory. So we have those laws, and the governments know it. They are aware of those things. We have different laws that try to protect the rights of people. And like I said, even when you look at some of the state, I haven't looked at the laws or policies that create, for instance, the Ebubeagu. But I can bet you there is no state that will create a law and say you can extrajudicially kill someone. It won't pass. There are processes in each state. Attorney generals are responsible. They are the law officers of the states. They are the ones that will ensure that the law comes out, suitable, and it must align. And even if there are, the courts cannot enforce such process. For instance, if you go through the court process, you can't, because the Constitution says a different thing. So the states are aware of it. They know what to follow. They know the laws to follow, whether the Constitution. And then the Constitution makes provisions of how to go about this. Your rights, certain rights in the Constitution can be limited, but there are processes you must follow. So for instance, if you remember very well, when our rights to movement was limited during COVID, the reason was public health. Constitution allows that. And most countries like Nigeria, then the government signed, they made a declaration to say, yes, we have to be in one place so that they can tackle the public health issue. But there are certain rights that cannot be limited. For instance, the right to torture. Freedom from torture, and that's where a lot of our security agencies find it a thing of concern. Why do we say that? You can torture someone, the person can never come back to that situation. You cannot restore, because it affects your right to dignity. If your dignity is removed, nobody can bring it back for you, because it's a thing of shame and it's a thing against yourself. Even the right to life, once your life is taken, is gone. You don't have a right, you don't have an opportunity to defend yourself. And that's why some of our reports, like we documented issues of mob violence, which is a different report. How people are instantly killed just in public spaces. But again, that report highlighted one of the issues was because the society felt, why should I go to the police when I know maybe the person will be released? We might as well just take the person's life, which is a total violation of the law.
Now, on this mob violence, I believe this year many Nigerians remember the sad Uromi killings in Edo State. You talked about it from the angle of jungle justice as well in your latter comments, but if I remember correctly, it was also a supposed security outfit, a vigilante, that carry out those killings. Now, it's not because there absence of laws. We expect that also there's supposed to be some level of training for this security personnel that are somewhat recruited by the state to strengthen security architecture. It's on the responsibility of the Nigerian Human Rights Commission as well, who is a gatekeeper of the advocacy on protecting human rights. Do you think that at this point there needs to be a decentralized approach? It almost seems as though it's always a top to bottom approach when we need to inform the security officers of the need to respect human rights.
Yes, like I said before, a lot of the things that we do are from other agencies as against internally. When you engage with security agencies, they tell you they have morning briefings, they have periodic trainings internally. But sometimes there is need for that to be institutionalized such that it's not at the beck and call of whoever comes in or goes out. And what we mean by that, the same way, if you engage, for instance, and I'm using the police because that's the agency you every day see. When you engage with police officers, and if you ask them now, Chapter 4 of the Nigerian Police Force Act, they understand their duties there, off records, off books, off hand. But do they, in the same vein, understand the constitutional provisions on protection of rights? Pari passu, as you are implementing this Chapter 4 of the law, you will see that there's a gap. When you engage with police officers, for instance, with respect to the Administration of Criminal Justice Act or law in the different states, there is a tendency to just reduce to an extent knowledge of the Administration of Criminal Justice Act or the law. And the police has a responsibility to protect law and order. The police has a responsibility if you commit something to carry out arrests. But in the process of carrying out that arrest, there are procedures. Do you tell me what my rights are? Am I detained within stipulated time? Am I charged to court as at when due? You will tend to see that some of those provisions are not adhered to. So, what is the concern? For me, I think institutionalizing includes imbibing some of these provisions of the Constitution, other human rights laws, administration of criminal justice, all the laws we've spoken about here, including them into their training parallel as you go on, and emphasizing that both of them are equally important. None is better than the other. Because you can't have a society where the police does not believe in the rights of people. Policing. The everyday Nigerian has a sense of fear once we see a police officer on the streets, because if he has a gun, you're not sure what's going to happen. And it's not only the police, but I'm giving that as an example. There's a sense of fear when you're in the traffic space and the security agencies are passing and you're wondering what next. Even the intimidation on the streets. Move away, let us pass. In other parts of the world, you move away for ambulance and fire service. Fire vehicles, trucks. In our society, all of them, including security agencies, you have to give way. And people who are in convoys. Worse still, if you are picked up, arrested, and the processes are not adequately followed. So, solution. The same way you do this operationalization or operations, let me say, the way they do their operational work should be the same way they should adhere to human rights, because they are not mutually exclusive. They work together. If you want to arrest somebody, the law says arrest the person, but you will tell the person, oh, this is the reason why you're being arrested. Sometimes you hear people say, I don't know why I was arrested. The police say, when we go to the police station, we'll get to know, but that's contrary to the law. So why can't you tell me why I'm being arrested? Why do we hear some people are invited, some people are handcuffed? There are procedures when you can do the handcuffs. It's not in all situations. So, and I think the agencies know what to do. But sometimes I think whether there's political will is a thing of concern.
Now, talking about the agencies and involvement of stakeholders, I know for the NHRC, they release a monthly dashboard of the amount of complaints they receive. I was particularly privileged to be in one of such dashboard engagements, and it was for the month of June, where over 327,000 cases of human rights violations were recorded. And when I looked at the bar chart, it was the North Central that had the most incidences. It coincided with the time when there were sad killings in Plateau and in Benue. And for some communities like that, they have been removed from their central homes and are now being kept in IDP camps. There have been some well-meaning Nigerians, much like the First Lady, who have made cash donations. But the sad incidences on relocation plans or being able to restore these persons to their communities and give them a chance at their livelihood. In terms of accountability, that's where my next question is going. Are there ways to be able to check these donations to see that they actually go for what they intended?
Yes, I think what needs to be done, and you know, sometimes we rely on these individual donations that are ad hoc. It takes me back to what I said before, that the responsibility is on government. Let's even keep aside when you said the First Lady did the donations. We saw that one. We can link her up to the president and all that. But the primary responsibility is both on the state and the federal government. People have, like you said, have left their ancestral homes, have moved to places, some of them have been there for years. Some children have lost parents. They don't have any family member, and then people within those spaces, IDP camps, then take care of them and raise them. Some go through all kinds of abuses, sexual violence. Kids, and not only girls, boys also are sodomized. And you get into a space and then the child becomes someone else. Now, the accountability that is needed from government, we've seen certain states like Benue and Plateau where we did some work around that also. Benue State was doing documentation of IDP, the people who are in the camps, in collaboration with one of the UN agencies. I think for Plateau State, they set up 2 different teams that were documenting. But after documentation, what next? How do you reintegrate them back into the society? Now, it takes us back to what we said about the Northeast. Our problem is not these provisions. Our problem is, can we take people to the largest extent to where they were before? Even if you can't take them to those total spaces, can you create spaces where they go back to homes at least? Let there be spaces that are comfortable. Let them have some shelter over themselves. The donations can be done in such a way that is streamlined. Sometimes when you say centralized, it also creates bureaucratic processes again. But even when it is centralized, who is accountable? It's still the same Nigerians that are also part of the process of ensuring accountability. We have heard severally over the years how donations that are given to camps are not given to the IDPs as expected. Food rations are not given as expected, even nutritionally. You might have rice being given every time as against putting some proteins, and some semblance of vegetables to keep them, nourished. And you have seen how, I think recently, I can't remember which, one of the geopolitical zones, I don't know which state specifically, we saw faces of children who are malnourished, acute malnourishment, which are health-related issues that would affect different children in that society. So accountability is both sides, top down, down up also. And by top, I mean those responsible for the agencies, but even those at the lower level who are in charge of the camps. How do you ensure that everyone gets what is expected? So I think it's something that we need to do holistically. And then citizens need to keep on demanding that accountability. We cannot rest. If we rest, then the processes will not be followed. And then, of course, whatever donations are made must be documented, rationed accordingly, distributed based on needs, and not kept by some overpowerful person within those camps. And then that's where you begin to see some of the problems. And apart from the violations that occur, What's the likelihood that some people that live in those camps cannot be conscripted again into the insecurity that we see within our society? We have kidnappings, we have terrorism, we have all kinds of things that are happening.
Do you think that the government of the day, particularly in these areas, take into cognizance practical and strategic needs when they're disbursing these donations?
I know that the government in the past had the social investments, investment scheme. I'm not sure how it ended. I'm not sure whether the current government has continued that. I can't really tell, but I know the previous government had. But we also had outcry and crisis around that process also. So sometimes I think the intention, was it really for the purpose for which it was created, or for something else? I don't have the facts, I don't have the details, but I remember a lot of media reports spoke about it. The fact that you have those schemes, who is held accountable? You always have it at a central level. Are you engaging the camp officials? Whether maybe we should adopt a process that allows for citizens to come and be at the camps to be distributing it. I mean, I don't know to what extent can we do it. Because when you go to the camps, you have the camp officials, you have SEMA, NEMA, you even have camp leaders of the IDPs themselves, male, female, you have youth leaders. And yet these things keep on occurring. So it means as a people, and I want to refer to the parlance of the late Professor Dora Akunyili, who said, good people, great nation. It has to be from our orientation. Her emphasis then was, it has to be attitudinal change from each and every one of us. And we have to imbibe in that if we want to see any change happen in the Nigerian society.
I know you've reiterated it on this platform this morning that it goes beyond advocacy, the demands for accountability. We need decisive action to take us there. Now, talking about action in itself, how do we strategize a time frame for the action we look to see? Because I've spoken to many in the civic space and they tell me that it's not about a linear transformation. It's something that we do continually and hope that the generations to come will benefit from the good work we're putting in now. On the note of that projection, do you have a template which you might recommend to the government in terms of carrying out this action plan?
It would be unfair for us to recommend to Nigerian government, but just to say that I think we can't address all the issues at once. Sometimes when you hear the different manifestos, different government coming in, there's so many lofty ideas. And if you look at the decades of decay, you would really wonder whether someone can actually achieve those things in 4 years. It's near impossible. I think there is need to categorize, prioritize first to see which one is most important. And most times Nigerians say security and economy. Because Section 14 of the Nigerian Constitution says security and welfare is the response. That's the reason for government. That's what our Constitution says. That's their focus. And yet, when you look at our society, those are the two things that are totally down. To a large extent, yes, there might be some semblance of security in certain parts of the country, but the economy, we're crying. It's a dear need. So I think it's also to prioritize. First, if you have a safe society, is secured, people live peacefully, I'm not suspicious of you, you're not suspicious of me, investors will come in. If you go to the states you mentioned, Benue and Plateau, are large producers of food crops. You have potato coming from, for instance, potato coming from Plateau State, Irish potatoes. You have yams coming from Benue State. But the communities where these atrocities are taking place, those food crops, farmers are unable to go to their farms to cultivate, and then it's affecting even, you see the rates and prices of those goods.
And overarchingly, our food insecurity.
Yes, and then food insecurity and different other things happening. So we need to prioritize as a government. The government needs to prioritize. What is most important? Can we secure the places so that people can farm, and then we solve another issue, which is food insecurity? Reduce hunger. We had the end hunger protests last year. And then begin to look at other things. If there are situations where the places where you get these food items, the roads are not accessible because that's an economic road. Can you fix those roads so that people can move in with these goods? Can you serve really as the government to make the place a level playing ground for people to bring out the products, sell them? You know, because the small businesses are what keeps the economy. But yet you see outcry from people. People are affected. Recently, I don't know whether it's data and statistics, but I think last year when we did around the hunger protests, when we tried to do just a survey loosely to understand people's thoughts around your ability to buy just your medications if you have any chronic illness, and you could see people complaining. Their purchasing power has also reduced. People had issues around school fees increments depending on where you're taking your child. For those that might be taken in government, it might not be as high. But also issues around even buying of food items. Now the economy is crying, people are crying. There is hunger in the land. It's not just a phrase, it's a reality. And yet there is insecurity. Is there a relationship between both? Yes, we see it in certain parts of the country. In the Northwest, I remember there was a time, I think last year or the year before, where you go to certain places where you get certain food items, or you know the way we have our steaks, suyas and all that. And one of the men said, we don't get chickens again from the Northwest because of the conflict. It sounds very basic, as if it's not possible, but it's possible. It's just that sometimes we're not observing those issues. How is it affecting farmers? If you have young people in such societies, how is it likely that if they don't have anything doing, they can be conscripted into the situations? So while I don't have a template, and I like I said, it would not be appropriate for Amnesty to be giving a template to government. The government knows its responsibility. But the suggestion is to prioritize what is most important, and our lives are important first. If I don't have food, it can lead to malnutrition for the under fives, for instance, that we're seeing. And then it affects my right to life.
Even crime rates, there's the interrelationship between poverty and crime rates.
Yes, there is. If I don't have a means of livelihood, I can just walk into anything. Or if somebody comes to convince me, please just come, we'll give you 5,000 every week or every month. And remember, maybe I don't have any means of livelihood. I'm always just coming out and looking for how to survive. What's the likelihood that most of the people that are involved, based on available public information, most of the people involved in the insecurities are young Nigerians? There are situations where you hear people say people within the ages of 16 upwards. So the youth demography, what's making them to join that?
I like how we've approached this conversation. We started out with the mandates. We started out with the needs. We started out with the need for scalability, and now you've talked about priority. Let's also make room to give the government some sort of kudos in what we're getting right. You've talked about the provisions of the Disabilities Act. Mm-hmm. You've talked about the need for a gender law. Mm-hmm. There's also conversations around the Child Rights Act. Mm-hmm. Amongst the beautiful legislation that we have, what are some of the areas that Nigeria is getting it right in terms of human rights and restorative justice?
I think, other than that, we've also had it's Senior Citizens Act.
Act, yes,
which is a lofty one too. Sometimes we tend to forget those of the elder demography who have the experience, over the years, and they've worked. I think we're getting it right with the laws that we need to implement. We shouldn't, that's the starting point. And I think it's a good thing. Sometimes we take things into piecemeal. So for instance, you find that if something happens, then we look at a provision. If you remember some years ago, I think with respect to the Child Rights Act, certain states had not passed the act. And then when there was a situation between a girl from a boy from Kano and a girl from Bayelsa, where there was a relationship, something, and a situation happened, certain states reacted and quickly passed, the laws in their states. And it's not about north or south. Different states across both regions, passed those laws. I think that was a good step, even though it should have been earlier, because we should be proactive and not react and not wait for a situation to happen. But for me, I think it's good. We now have, I'm not sure of the statistics, but I think almost maybe about 30 something states have passed the Child Rights Act. Almost all, I think, have passed the Administration of Criminal Justice laws into their states. The VAP is still there also. People are passing those laws. Like I said, states like Lagos is really doing well with the violence against persons.
VAP.
Yes.
Akwa Ibom is also doing
yes, they're doing well. So you see some level of, and doing well for me is picking those provisions and challenging the courts.
Because I've also seen the name and shame. That's why I call
Yes.
Akwa Ibom. They also have
Yes.
named and shamed offenders.
Yes, which is what the law requires. That's what VAP says. So that me and you know who those offenders are. In case they are in that society, let us be mindful of those, because atrocities of sexual violence happen in closed spaces. They rarely happen in open space. If it's happening there, everyone will stop it from happening. So they do the name and shaming, and I think that's a good one. I think it's also a learning that other states should do. And I keep referring, now you're telling me it's Akwa Ibom also. But the Lagos has a special special courts on sexual offenses. So it means those judges, their focus is those sexual offenses. I think that's an area that other states can learn from also. Can you create courts for special, I'm not saying create on every situation, but these are situations that result to different types of violations. And it's helping them to address the cases as quick as possible within the timelines of the law, and then ensures that justice is done to the victim, to the defendant, and to the society. Those are the tripods of justice that you ensure that it happens.
Well, I must thank you, Mrs. Barbara Magaji, for taking out time to discuss this with us on the program this morning.
Thank you so much for having me.
Always a pleasure.